All right, thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to get started here shortly, but while we wait, we're doing brief introductions in the chat. You can tell us who you are, your pronouns, your organization, and job title, and we'll get started in a couple of minutes once everyone has a chance to log on. All right, we're going to give it one more minute and then we will get started with today's webinar. Again, if you're just joining us, please head over to the chat, introduce yourself there, and we'll get started here shortly. All right, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to today's Digital Service Network webinar titled Digital Service Team Question Bank and Hiring Insights. I'm Beeck Center Fellow Kirsten Wyatt and it's my pleasure to moderate today's presentation. The Digital Service Network is a growing peer learning network that connects and supports digital service teams and professionals who use data, design, and technology to improve and deliver government services. One of the ways we do this is to uncover and share resources to help build and grow digital service teams in local, state, provincial, and federal governments. Today, we'll share with you a suite of resources to help with hiring for important roles on your digital service team. The Digital Service Network is supported by the Beeck Center for Social Impact and Innovation at Georgetown University and the U.S. Digital Response. At all Digital Service Network events, you can expect that we're going to make good use of your time. We'll talk like humans and not bureaucrats, and you'll learn something and meet somebody new. Today, we are so excited to welcome students from the University of North Carolina Master of Public Administration program. The DSN recently partnered with this research team for their service learning project. Based on feedback from our DSN community, we tasked them with creating a question bank for digital service teams to leverage when hiring digital talent into government. The exciting conclusion of today's event is the addition of their research of the digital talent question bank and the tools they generated from their work into our Digital Service Network library. The team interviewed digital service teams from 3 states, 2 cities, for their report, and as well as the team from U.S. Digital Response. So today we are so pleased to welcome Michaela Hipke, Hannah Lynch, Matthew Sutton, Lauren Wilcox, and Elizabeth Wilkes to our webinar. Michaela is pasting into the chat their LinkedIn profiles, and I encourage you to connect with all of them, given the talent that you're going to see that they brought to this project. They are must-adds on your LinkedIn connection list. They'll share more about their approach, their insights from the research, and then they'll walk us through the final question bank that is available for your use. And there will be plenty of time for your questions. Please use the chat to ask those questions, and I'll make sure that we answer them all on the webinar today. A reminder that this webinar is free. A recording is being made and a recap will be written and shared online, as well as the recording, so you can share it out with your colleagues and friends. And if you're not yet a member, we hope you'll take a minute to sign up for the Digital Service Network email list. We are here to be responsive to your needs and will develop more webinars, articles, research, toolkits, and more based on what you're looking for to advance your work in your organizations. And again, a reminder to use that chat box to ask questions. If it's particularly relevant, we may interrupt the presentation to ask it, but we will most likely save them until the end so we can make sure we get to all of them. And then as you've seen, we will be active in the chat, sharing links and information from the presentation today and about Digital Service Network. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michaela, Hannah, Matthew, Lauren, and Elizabeth. Cannot wait to learn from all of you. Let's go.
All right. Hi, everybody. We're so happy to have you all here today. Oops. Hold on one second here. Make sure I show you the right view. Are you guys seeing my presenter mode or the regular mode?
We see presenter, but at the top you can swap the displays.
There we go. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So happy to have you all here today. I am Michaela Hippie. I'm the other Michaela. I'm here with my fantastic dream team. We all work together on this project this semester. We are all Master of Public Administration students at UNC Chapel Hill, and we conducted this project with the guidance of our faculty member, Dr. Alicia Dehart Davis. So this is what we're going to go through today. We're going to teach you all a little bit about our project that we worked on. So we'll begin by talking about what the purpose was, the scope that was kind of outlined for us by the Beeck Center that we used to guide the work we did. We'll run through our research approach, so how we went about doing this work, and then the findings that we took away. That part is going to focus heavily on the interviews that we conducted with chief digital service officers from different organizations. We'll spend the bulk of our time toward the end talking about the question bank we developed itself and the different resources you're going to be able to find within there. And we'll wrap up with a few final takeaways, some kind of through lines that we identified with all of the different discussions we had, and have time for questions at the end. So first we'll discuss the purpose of the project. The Beeck Center approached us to ask if we would be able to develop a list of potential interview questions for use in hiring personnel for digital service teams. And we really wanted to have that focus on the governments that they work with, so state, local, provincial units. And we would be able to then take those interview questions and put them into a question bank format that digital service network members could use. So it needed to be broadly applicable according to some of the takeaways we got from the organizations we talked with. So in order to do this, we reviewed existing literature in this area to sort of understand some of the key academic and scholarly takeaways in this area, in areas like interview structure, questions, and whether or not question banks existed in the public sector like this that we consult with. After that, we also conducted interviews with those CDSOs to gain some insights on best practices and current challenges and opportunities in the sector. And then we used all of those things together to develop that question bank for everyone to use. So just a little background, most of you are familiar with this, but the federal government has sort of been the forerunners in this area, demonstrating commitment to improving digital resources for citizens and community members. And in the US, that's really particularly been led by the United States Digital Service and 18F. And now we're seeing this sort of begin to bleed out into states, municipalities, and other local governments who are establishing their own digital service teams. We've really found that this is a very unique area of government that has its own particular challenges, opportunities ahead, and every group we talk to has different approaches with how they're handling the challenges that they face.
Yeah, so I'll take you through the first part of our research approach. We really took two main approaches. As Michaela said, we did a kind of literature review, which was the more academic side of things. And then we also did interviews with different stakeholders. So the first thing that we did was looked into question development. This came out of searching for question banks. Question banks for public sector really didn't exist in our research, and specific stuff about the tech industry was really not useful for what we were trying to create. So what we decided to do was look at question development and how we can use that to create the question bank that we've come up with. And really three key points came out of the research that we were doing. The first of those being that it's really key to make sure that you're asking two different types of questions when you're interviewing people, evidence and counter evidence seeking questions. So these are the follow-up type questions you might get sometimes in an interview. You know, tell me about a time you had to work to meet a deadline, and then the follow-up of tell me about a deadline you couldn't meet, but you tried to meet. And the evidence behind that suggests that when people are asked two contradicting questions, you're more likely to get a candid answer out of them because you're able to kind of quantify the differences between the two and read a little bit between the lines. The second thing that came up that we thought was really important was structuring your interviews and questions to generate a thematic flow. So what that means is that you want your questions to kind of naturally bleed into one another to make the interview feel like a conversation between the candidate and the interviewer. The benefit of that is that people are more likely to be open and honest and relaxed, and it gives both the candidate and the interviewer the opportunity to be their most authentic selves, to talk the best about their skills and their opportunities, and for the interviewer to be able to honestly tell the candidate about the role and about the job and the organization. And the other thing that came up was experience-based questioning versus situational questioning. And that's deciding whether to ask someone about an actual experience that they've had or a hypothetical work situation. And what the research suggests is that the most effective interviews are ones that ask about both of those. So asking someone, tell me about a time you did this, and also asking someone, if you were in this situation, what would you do? So the other thing that we did in this part of the research was looking into the specific skills and motivations that we really saw as being important in DSTs. So we're obviously talking about, the technical skills that you're looking for in software developers, product designers, UX designers, but also the specific interpersonal and communication skills that are necessary to succeed in the types of industries and the types of sectors that these DSTs are operating in. And so one really key thing that we want to highlight and that we tried to stress in the question bank is you're not just asking someone if they're able to code, if they know a specific coding language, but you're also asking someone how they would apply that to the specific circumstances of your local state government, and how they would fit that into the specific workplace. And the other big thing we wanted to do is, obviously this is a public sector facing question bank. This is for organizations that operate within the public sector. So we tried to really highlight how to ask about public service motivation. And the most important takeaway from that is that most interviewers already ask about it. When you ask about a candidate's experience, when you ask about why they want this job, you're asking about their public service motivation. So the important thing for us was just to highlight that to make sure that interviewers are aware of what they're asking.
As Kirsten mentioned at the beginning, as part of our research, we conducted interviews with several digital service practitioners, including 2 at the city level, 3 at the state level, and the team from US Digital Response. And the folks that we interviewed were gracious enough to provide some of the materials that they have compiled, their best practices for interviewing, which we drew from as well in creating our question bank. So going into our interview findings, the first thing I want to discuss is the interview themes. We kind of divided it up into 3 different parts based on information that we gained throughout conducting our interviews. The first part is we identified challenges with recruitment and retention for digital service teams, the attributes that our practitioners found were most effective and made team members most successful, and then finally the hiring methods and the different, methods that teams use when they interview, because we also found that there was a lot of variation there as well. So the first part we identified was the challenges in the process, and there are a lot of challenges that our folks identified, from starting up the team to identifying what roles are needed to actually hiring for those roles and getting those teams off the ground. The first challenges involves standing up a team from the get-go, convincing skeptics that this team is even necessary. We already have an IT department within our government. Why do we need a DST as well? We already have project managers. Why do we need product managers? What is a UX designer? We've never had that before. Why do we need it? So it really came down to advocates being able to advocate strongly for why the government needs a digital service team to advance digital services for their community. The next challenge we identified is the budget and structure. Each local government is different. Each local government's digital needs are different. So the initial key hires for a digital service team are going to be different, and they're going to depend on what that individual government's needs are at that time. How do you identify who those key initial hires are, and how do they fit into the existing government structure, deciding on who you need most at that moment, from the get-go, and then who you can afford to hire maybe a year or 2 into the process. Another challenge that we identified were certain HR processes can be very slow and cumbersome and outdated, which slows down the hiring process as well. Sometimes insufficient onboarding from HR can put more of the onus of that on the shoulders of the actual digital service chiefs themselves, which can slow down the process as well. Selling the job, our interviewees stressed the importance of making sure that candidates had a realistic view of what digital service team work was going to be like. They found team members were much less likely to burn out if they were transparent from the get-go, and they had high levels of public service motivation and pro-social motivation. That was one of the biggest themes that we found throughout our interviews, was that the local governments can't always be competitive with the private sector. So public service motivation, folks coming from the public or from the private sector who want to make a difference in their communities, is really key in succeeding in the DST environment. And then finally, expectation management, being realistic with candidates, and once folks are hired during the onboarding process, about the challenges that DST members face. And the fact that they may feel like they're fighting an uphill battle, they may feel like they're going it alone, but the other team members have their back and they're not alone, and everybody's going through the same challenges together.
Exactly. And so just to give you some color to the incredible interviews we had with folks in the field, one of these standout quotes to us was this idea that you're not going to get bonuses. We're not looking at promotions. You're here to do the work. And the work is the meaningful thing that you're doing. And being clear about that in the interview process, which is just as much about the interviewee understanding the interviewer, and just being able to find those folks who are motivated to be there for the bigger picture, for the grander purpose. One of the self-evident attributes looking for in these questions that is self-evident is usually communication skills, right? Folks who interview well are going to have communication skills, and specifically for DSTs, it's not just about your conversations with your other team members. It's about how are you communicating across departments. Unlike your typical or existing technology departments where folks can be siloed, digital service teams by nature are collaborative. Even if your title is software engineer, right? From user experience designers all around, folks are going to need to be able to communicate with a lot of different types of people. Which leads into this concept of relationship building, this idea of relationships moving at the speed of trust, bringing on folks, especially early on, who can build that trust both with each other to weather the storms as they're getting started and proving their value to the government unit, and then also with the colleagues and the folks they're ultimately trying to help, which include their fellow colleagues in the unit and citizens alike. And that sometimes involves emotional labor. And so repeatedly in interviews, we heard emotional labor, emotional intelligence, EQ, different words describing generally the same thing of like, are folks able to be in rooms with all different kinds of people and have the technical chops necessary. Humility and resilience, having a people first mentality. A quote that was very memorable as we were writing our report was this idea that DSTs are change management teams disguised as technology teams, right? It's about changing a culture around how we are using software and technology and making experiences better for everyone. And finally, action-oriented, bias for action or implementation, delivering. These words describing simply those who have a track record of not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. Another standout quote to us really gets at this idea of scrappiness and grit being an attribute to look for when you're developing questions to use interviews. So these things are really tough. So having a good sense of personal balance and resilience. I think also a big one is scrappiness and resourcefulness, because we don't have a lot of resources. You have to be able to work with what you have and be happy and creative about it. instead of annoyed. And I think that last one, especially this idea of being able to be happy and creative when you're faced with challenges at work instead of frustrated is such a key attribute of folks on successful digital service teams.
So now that we understand where all of our information came from, the research that we did, we're going to jump in and take a look at the question bank itself. So the question bank, we decided to make it on Google Sheets just because it's accessible, it's easily understood, and people will be able to look at it on the network library very easily. So when you pull it up, there's going to be 5 sections at the bottom. And the 5 sections are going to be the question bank itself, an attribute list, hiring process components, interview best practices, and finally credits. So when you jump into the page, this is what it's going to look like. And you can see right at the bottom that all of those 5 different sections are listed down there. And then above, you will see the questions, the attributes, and then the specific areas as well. We decided that we were going to have 4 topical groups that were going to relate to the questions. So as you can see, underneath the red section that says motivations are going to be questions that relate to that, and so on as it goes down the list. And so if you are looking for something that you want to learn about technical competencies, or you want to learn about personality, values, and culture, you can jump right to that section and then look through from there. And we can. And so this is just a closer look at that. So this one specifically is with motivation. So if you were looking for motivation, you want to ask questions like, why are you interested in this role? Or why are you looking to find a new role? What are you trying to find? And then you look to the side and you can find the attributes themselves. And so the attributes relate to a different section. So we have motivation, or PSM, experience and performance, technical competencies, personality, values, and culture. And that will all be on the next sheet within the Google Sheet.
Yeah, and so the attributes that Matthew just mentioned are something that came up specifically within our research and also within our interviews as something that hiring teams wished that they could sort of highlight within their interviews. They really wanted to get at some of the really specific attributes that they were looking for. And so what we did is put together a list of some of the attributes that we thought were best applicable to DSTs. We tried to keep it as broad as possible to touch all the bases we possibly could. And so then what we did is we sorted through those attributes and tried to ask questions that specifically targeted them. And so what we've ended up with is attributes linked specifically to questions. As you can see on this slide, here are just a couple of examples. There are obviously the whole list of them in the question bank. But for example, with resilience, discuss a time when you had to solve a problem with very few resources, or your communication skills and relationship attributes. Tell us about a time you used informal relationships within an organization to accomplish a goal. And for the public sector challenge specific to DSTs, how would you advocate for yourself or defend your presence among government officials who believe your project is unnecessary? And then what we've done here is just shown you the full list of attributes that you'll find in the question bank. I won't read them all out for you, you can see them there. But what we've done is try to include some that some DSTs might go for, some might not. We try to keep it broad and applicable so that people can kind of pick and choose what things are most important or most salient for their specific organization.
Yes, thanks for that, Han. And you know, again, with the generosity of our interviewees, they shared some of the resources with us, and often their hiring guides included not only ideas about questions, but what the structure of the hiring process is from start to finish, from that first submission of a resume and application through to the end. And that varies quite a bit. And so we thought it might be useful to have a selection of all these different components that could exist, whether you're required by your unit's HR department or you have more flexibility. Just being able to understand what those look like on average, and being able to understand what each point of the process serves. And relatedly, there's also some best practices that we found appeared across different teams and different levels And often with those best practices, we really appreciated the value of in public service consistency and fairness, and being able to really make sure that that folks who are interviewing for these roles, everyone gets the best shot, a fair shot at these really unique roles, and being able to be consistent in the way that you're interviewing folks. So really, even going down to asking the questions with the exact same wording, right? Documenting your interviews immediately after they're completed, right? And so, yeah, then the next slide actually indicates some of those best practices, which again, you can find as multiple sheets on that tab. So.
Okay, so we breezed quickly through that. There's obviously a ton of great information available in the question bank, so we hope you'll all take some time to explore it. But some final takeaways from us throughout this whole process. DSTs are such an emerging field that no two teams are exactly alike. And so, we can't really give people an explanation of this that says, this is exactly how the best teams are doing it. This is exactly the approach that they take, the positions order that they hire in, that doesn't exist. Every group is going to be different, and what they decide to do will be unique to their specific circumstances. But we did find that some through lines exist. Obviously, these teams are all screening for technical qualifications. Public service motivation, as we mentioned, is a huge factor here. It's very important, especially competing to pull talent from the private sector. And emotional intelligence is a really big part of that, perhaps more so than the private sector because of that need to interface with government officials, with the public, and so on. Best practices include streamlining and standardizing the hiring process. And this really ensures that positions are accurately conveyed and communicated to prospective talent, that individuals are a good fit for what the organization needs, and that all candidates have equal opportunity in the interview process. And so our hope with the question bank is that it will give organizations a place to start if they're thinking about launching a digital service team, and a framework for building out or refining their hiring processes. We really hope that no matter where individual teams are at in their formation, they will be able to find something useful within this document that they can take and apply to their hiring process. Oops. And that's all we have for you all today. Our email addresses are all on here. So if you do think of a question later on that you're dying to know the answer to, we totally encourage you to email us. We'd be happy to connect with you. And at this point, I will stop sharing my screen and we'll be happy to take questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I have been frantically tweeting away screenshots of everything that you presented. Again, as a reminder to our attendees, this recording and a recap will be available at digitalservicenetwork.org. And most excitingly, the question bank and their final report are now in the Digital Service Network library. I also want to reiterate, and I see some of the folks that are on this webinar that were part of the research with this research team, and just want to thank our Digital Service Network governments who participated in the interviews and contributed to the question bank and report itself. Really appreciate your time. As a reminder, please use the chat box to ask questions, and I have a couple here to get us started. John Profit writes, and this is a comment, but information dense resource with a lot of value packed into a small space. Couldn't agree more. Thanks for that comment, John. Really impressed with the work that these students did. Okay, so first question here is, can you tell us more about the concept of public service motivation? It sounds like this really was a key finding about how we attract talent to join government versus the private sector. So what are some of the ways that governments, especially digital service teams, can convey this in recruitments? And does the question bank speak to this or measure this? And what are some examples of questions that do that?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about this. So public service motivation is a very popular topic right now in public administration and human resources in particular. If you look this up on Google Scholar, you will find a million articles about it. And the idea of public service motivation sort of draws a farther line out from what we mentioned before, which is pro-social motivation. So pro-social motivation is this concept of motivation when you want to do something because you want to help other people. You're motivated by the idea of doing good for others. Public service motivation is a theory within PA research that says there are some individuals who are particularly motivated by this idea of like public service, of doing things for other people within government and the public sector. And so, like we mentioned in the presentation, a lot of you are probably already doing this and you don't necessarily know that you are. So language in recruitment ads can be things like, you know, do good for your community, do good for other people, serve others, help, you know, your fellow Austinites. Or whoever that might be. There are, like I said, there's actual research out there. I can find some examples and pop them in the chat of language that you can use in these areas. But it really is that concept of doing good for others and service that are sort of the key factors with looking at this. It's important also to emphasize public service motivation isn't like a cure-all. It's not going to fix everything. If you have, you know, poor salaries or bad working conditions, it's not going to fix those things, but it's sort of one piece of a larger puzzle. And I think you saw probably in the question bank that we have specific questions that are linked to this. So you can go in and look for that PSM indicator, and that will tell you which questions are targeted toward learning more about this area.
Wonderful, thank you. Great question here from Kai. Did the research team explore outcomes at all? And one thing that he's been thinking about is how to benchmark the work and the results to the process. And then curious about other digital service teams hiring funnel numbers, the percent of applicants that advance, the EQ interview stage, technical interview stage, offer acceptance, lots of rich information in there that would be great to research further. I'm guessing I know the answer, but why don't you all share if you delved into this at all?
I wish we could. We didn't have a lot of time to work on this project. We were semester limited since this was service learning. So we actually worked on this from about February to April, very quick. Does anyone else? Someone else may want to speak on this more.
I was just going to say, thanks, Michaela. Yeah, I just wanted to offer, it's sort of indirectly related, but one of the quotes I'm remembering is this idea of don't over-engineer your organizational development or you know, what your org charts are going to be. Part of the point here is teams are often just starting up. There's a few that are in a more mature stage, but especially as they're starting up, it's so important to focus on getting the right people with you. And yeah, so those might, I don't know what the stats would be necessarily at the beginning, but getting those folks on board and then from that strong foundation, continue to build out. And then maybe folks can be in a place to track those outcomes. I think it's certainly an excellent and worthy of further inquiry for a later time. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and you know, Kai says it's totally understandable, and perhaps that's the stage 2.0 of this project next spring. I'm gonna also put in a quick plug. Every spring, the UNC MPA program HR class looks for practical projects for students to work on. I think this is my 8th time working with UNC MPA student teams because the research they do is so amazing. And so I highly encourage you to follow Leisha DeHart Davis, the professor who leads this class. If your government is interested in research of this caliber, submit a project idea next spring and you can get your own rockstar team like this. Truly has been fantastic experience. So I'll just put in that plug. Vicki from Austin has a great question here. She was oddly captivated by the challenges slide. As a research team, were you surprised by anything that came up during that part of the interviews?
I think the thing that surprised us most was just the wide breadth and depth of the challenges that digital service team members face when they're starting up a team for the first time. You know, everything from having to sell the idea of the team to local government officials to kind of the outdated hiring practices that they sometimes run into, constantly having to justify their existence, pushback. And then once they do get the authorization to form the team, you know, because digital service teams are such a new concept across the US, there's not a whole lot to go off of in terms of, you know, who do they hire first, which, you know, there's best practices for, you know, which positions are most important, you know, where do they start? And I think the digital service network has really been key in helping teams get off the ground for the first time, because it feels very overwhelming. And that was another thing that came up, was that, you know, new digital service leaders feel very overwhelmed from the very beginning, because they, you know, they feel like they're fighting an uphill battle and there's just not a whole lot out there to go off of. So we tried to concretely identify those challenges and then also come up with ways that they could be addressed to help make the process seem a little bit less daunting.
Yeah, the other thing I would mention, I think that we talked about a lot that was interesting, was several of us have loved ones or partners who work in tech. And it was very interesting to hear about these challenges and then discuss it with them and say, you know, like, what would you do if you had like a city council member come up to you and say, like, I don't understand like APIs, I don't know, whatever, like something very random, and that this person has to sort of be able to have the technical know-how, but also the ability to communicate with total like lay people at any point in time, and sort of always be selling their existence and the work that they're doing. And it was really interesting. Like, you can just tell that this is a very rare breed of individual who would want to do this, because, you know, there are plenty of people who are working in this sector who have absolutely no interest in having to do that work and sort of that interpersonal one-on-one communication.
This is it's more of a comment from our friend John in Ohio, but I do want to read it out loud and into the recording, and would love to hear any reactions from our research team. And he points out that sometimes it's the questions that the person being interviewed asks of the potential employer, future employer, to kind of understand that they're thinking, paying attention, and they understand the work that's being done. And his wondering is whether specifically prompting candidates to bring X number of key questions to an interview would reveal some of that public service motivation. So just any kind of initial reaction to that, in terms of, you know, some of the things you pointed out about this being somewhat of an emerging field, that unique balance between technical intelligence and emotional intelligence. So any feedback to this? And it looks like there's some thumbs up and some +1s for this comment from our attendees as well.
Yeah, I would just say this is definitely something that came up when I was researching how do you identify motivation in candidates. One of the big things that came up is actually, you know, not always an answering of a question, but sometimes when a candidate asks you something about like the workplace environment or the culture, or specifically in a role like this, you know, people will ask about what their engagement will be like with the community, or what their engagement will be like with stakeholders and stuff like that. That's a really key way that you can look in and see, like, okay, if they're really passionate about the community, they're going to be asking about it, and they're going to be asking about, you know, the motivation and the really like what the DST wants to achieve and why they want to achieve it. So that's definitely something we considered. I'm pretty sure we wrote about that in the report because it came up in the literature review we were looking at. It's just difficult to like quantify that in a number. And I think the issue is if you start saying to people, please bring questions for us, you're forcing something that might not actually be there. Whereas if you're letting people authentically come to you with the questions in the interview, that's the benefit of having the kind of very thematic interview. It allows people to bring up stuff that's important to them and to ask those questions.
And I will say that sometimes that's my favorite part of interviews, is just to see who's ready or who has one of those questions that's really just a way to preface a humble brag that's coming in their response to it as well. So great idea, great point. Thank you for sharing that, Hannah. It looks like John has some feedback on the hiring process tab to really beef up that marketing phase of making, doing and posting the job. And so, John, I would encourage you, if you want to send any comments or edits, and we've captured this comment as well, and we'll share it back with the team. Again, with everything that we do at the Digital Service Network, everything is free, openly available, and we really want it to be a collaborative process. So if you find ways as practitioners on digital service teams to improve on these resources, let us know. We are all ears, no shame in our game. We are absolutely willing to improve and build on the great resources that we have available. Another question here. In your ideal world, who is the question bank and the report written for? Do you think it's for digital service teams? Is it for HR departments? And did you experience kind of that push and pull sometimes that can happen when you have a hiring department and then a team that's responsible for doing the technical side of hiring? And any recommendations you'd make to folks about how to best use the bank and the report in their organizations?
Yeah, the bank and the report are written for both HR departments and digital service teams in different capacities. Digital service leaders are going to be the ones that have the knowledge of the technical skills and the personality traits and the attributes that they're looking for in that specific role. But it's also important because these teams are so new that HR be looped into the process so they know kind of what the digital service leaders are looking for. It might be something completely different than they've ever had in their organization before. We did experience some push and pull versus kind of surrounding these are the new roles that we need versus these are the positions we've always had and sort of this is the way we've always done it. So I guess if I could leave one takeaway for the HR folks that are on the call, it's that your understanding of this process is going to be crucial for the digital service team leaders to get their folks in the organization, get them onboarded, understanding that these roles are new. They may not fit into your existing classification systems. So you may have to kind of be creative or go back to the drawing board and figure out exactly how you're going to bring these folks into your organization. Because this isn't something that's really been done before a whole lot. As far as does it work best when both the hiring department and the digital service department use the question bank and reference report? Absolutely. With both teams understanding sort of the conclusions and the research that we found is just going to bring everybody on the same page. And when everybody is on the same page, that makes everything a lot easier. So yeah, I would encourage HR folks not to just say, well, these are digital service leaders hiring practices. All we do is make the phone call when they've made the decision. Really integration between both departments during the hiring process is going to lead to the smoothest setup for your digital service team.
Wonderful. That's a great answer. And I think especially in larger organizations where maybe that initial application screen is being done by HR and then it's getting passed on to departments, having this report and the bank and the best practices is a way to just really get your HR office or your teams up to speed on what it looks like to hire these positions into government. And one thing I'll just put out there, and it's our hope that by having this report and this bank available, we are able to show the value of best practices or literature review with all of the references the team cited in the report as one more way to push back against, well, that's the way we've always done it. Our hope is, from our vantage point here at the Beeck Center at Georgetown, their academic research from the University of North Carolina will give you and empower your teams to have some evidence of why this new approach or this way of going about hiring makes a lot of sense for these teams. So lean on us, and if we can be helpful and provide assistance to you, please never hesitate to ask and reach out. That's what the Digital Service Network is here for. A question here about folks offering their advice on interviews. Did they call out how many people go into interviews for digital service positions? Are the interviews team interviews? Are they usually one-on-one? Do you find, and maybe, I don't know if this was part of what you asked, but were there interview panels where it included peers of the position that was being hired? or subordinates or external facing roles that the digital service team supports?
Thanks for that. That's an excellent question. I'll say in the best practices tab, one of the points there is to never interview alone. And really, again, just for the broad goal of minimizing bias, and then also just for getting multiple perspectives, and then having that debrief as soon as possible, immediately after, and documenting that. I think if you bring those practices in, whether it's 2 people or potentially 3, 4, like some that are going to have this role already, if it's already a more built out team. But again, for most folks starting out, it's going to be whoever can get on board. And admittedly, when you have multiple people on interviews too, or you just had to do a panel round, it can be really intensive, time and energy intensive. That's one thing we heard is like, okay, well, we're all kind of in the middle of trying to hire, we're in this hiring zone right now to get one person or get a few more folks on board. But we also overwhelmingly heard that effort is worth it. It might take a lot for the moment, but having those multiple perspectives and really knowing this person is going to become an integrated part of your team. I think not necessarily the more the better, like you could probably accomplish it with 2 or 3. I think we heard that especially in initial stages, just having at least 2 in those initial ones. Yeah, that would be a start to your question, but I think it's a great thing to be asking.
All right, I'm going to pose this as our final question, but again, if anyone else has any last minute question, please drop it in the chat. And so I don't want to get too personal, and so you can pass if you'd like, but would love to know if this research inspires you to potentially think about roles working in an organization that has a digital service team, or roles in a government where you'd have exposure to things like product management or user research. Did this give any sort of inspiration to join a digital service team when you graduate in a year?
I'll go first because I'll give everyone else a second, because I already have a job currently. For those who don't know, I'm in the program part-time, and I'm also director of content strategy at the UNC School of Government. But I will say this was a totally new exposure for me. I had never heard of digital service teams before. And as somebody who kind of works at the intersection of digital products and content and communications, I was fascinated by it. I have a little more technical experience than a lot of communicators do. And so for me, it definitely, I would say, got the wheels turning of thinking that there were places in government that were a better intersection of some of my interests than I maybe had previously realized. So this experience has been a ton of fun, and I've enjoyed the opportunity to learn about it.
And I can talk a little bit too. While I am not technologically advanced by any sense of the word, just learning about this has been super interesting to me in general because of how forward facing it is and how you're able to help people in something that they might not understand overly well, or just something that they might need a helping hand with. And being able to come from this place of knowledge as the government to help people, like whether that is a state or local government, and then help people on that forward facing aspect of it on something that you know very well, is just an area of government that is new, it's emerging, it's special, and it's merging this technical knowledge with personal knowledge, which is something that's very important to me. And I think that if we're doing more of that, we're headed in the right direction. So I just got really excited learning about it and just being able to be a part of the process a little bit.
Yeah, I would say I was fascinated by them, and actually not for myself, but my partner is a software developer, and now all the time I'm looking for DST jobs, and I'm like, you should so apply for this. I think you'd love it. So something I'm definitely interested in, but something I'm really now pushing him to do.
Not just to keep it going, not only that, but also I think a lot of us are in the space of local government right now. We're doing summer summer gigs, and I see the usefulness of the places that don't have the teams, like how useful they could be. Like, because again, you know, for the most part, places don't have something like this, and so really understanding the concept, you know, and the more great work for folks starting out, the more you're proving to other folks that like this is really this could just be an incredible, you know, not just value add, but the whole point is just improving the experience for everyone involved. So yeah.
Yeah, the thing I kept coming back to during this research is if everybody knew how much value added these teams were to local government, there wouldn't be nearly the pushback that there is to creating them. And, you know, whether or not I end up, I'm not a digital person myself, and whether or not I end up in an environment like that, just having the knowledge that I've gained to advocate for it in the future, you know, if I were to be in an organization where they were thinking about doing something like this, I would see the value added to it. And we would all be able to see the value that it would bring to the organization. And, you know, we could advocate among that, advocate for that among others, which can be really powerful when you have people other than, you know, the technological folks themselves saying we need this, other people in the organization saying, yes, I understand what the purpose would be, and I agree that we need this. That could be a really powerful thing. So I think that's another benefit that came out of us doing our project. You know, taking 5 people who are not invested in technology, who knew nothing about this before, and doing all the research and coming up with recommendations, and you've turned the 5 of us into digital service advocates. So I think that's something that's been really cool over the course of the past few months.
So it seems like we were successful in our mission to convert you. So thanks for summing that up so nicely for us, Lauren. Thanks for all of the communication and link sharing to job opportunities in the chat. Really important to be promoting these opportunities to each other. And most of all, just a huge thanks to the 5 of you for your incredibly thoughtful research. To me, what this has shown is when we think about digital service, it's really about the element of service. It's about public service. It's about the ways we provide services to our communities and to our constituents in a way, you know, meeting them where they're at and their expectations in modern society of how they engage with their government. And you've shown us how governments can put these teams in place. And you've given us some great practical tools that we can share out with the Digital Service Network and with governments across North America. So a huge thanks to the 5 of you. Again, really encourage all of you on today's webinar to connect with these 5 on LinkedIn, put them in your contacts, make note of where they're headed, where they're going, offer them jobs because they're phenomenal writers, and just really appreciate the time and energy that you put into this project. For everyone here on the webinar, a reminder that we now have these resources available at digitalservicenetwork.org, so you can access the report and the question bank. As another reminder, if you're on this call and you're not on the Digital Service Network email list, please join us. Michaela will put the link in the chat. This is a great way to just stay in touch about future events that we'll be doing. We do a monthly newsletter where we do a summary of academic and practical research that's being done in the digital services field. And then we also just want your feedback on how this event went, future topics that you'd like us to explore, because we really are here to serve you in the ways that your governments are providing modern digital services to better serve your communities and constituents. So with that, I will wrap up today's webinar. A huge thanks to Michaela, Matthew, Elizabeth, Hannah, and Lauren for your research, and thanks to all of you for joining us. Have a great day.